There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when something inside you shifts. You hear your own voice, not the one you've trained for approval, but the raw, tired whisper that asks, "What about me?" You've spent a lifetime being agreeable, bending to fit the shape of other people's comfort, mistaking compliance for compassion. But beneath that smile that stretches too far, beneath the nods and the careful silence, there's an ache. Not loud, but constant. It hums through your body like a forgotten truth trying to surface. Carl Jung called this ache the cost of wearing a persona, a mask crafted not from authenticity, but from fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of not being needed, the fear of what might happen if you stopped saying yes. And so you shrink yourself to be digestible, softening your edges, swallowing your opinions, hoping that being liked will one day feel like being loved. But it never does. Because people-pleasing is not an act of kindness. It is a slow erasure. Each time you betray your truth to keep the peace, you trade your wholeness for temporary safety. And though the world may reward your obedience with praise, what it never gives back is the part of you that knows who you are without the performance. There is nothing noble about disappearing for the sake of harmony. Jung saw this not as humility, but as a distortion of the self, a false identity built to survive, not to thrive. And survival has a cost. It costs your fire. It costs your freedom. It costs you the ability to stand tall in a world that benefits from your silence. But if you are here reading this, then maybe that fire hasn't gone out. Maybe it's waiting. Maybe your soul is done rehearsing. Because the moment you stop needing to be liked is the moment you begin to be free. Not reckless, not unkind, just real. And realness, unlike approval, can never be taken from you. This is where the journey begins, not with changing who you are, but with remembering who you were before the mask, before you confused peace with permission, before you became a stranger to your own needs. The next part of your life doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. And that honesty will cost you something, but what it gives you back is everything. What nobody tells you is that the moment you begin to pull away from the role of the pleaser, something inside begins to shake. It isn't rebellion, it's remembrance. Part of you that has been silent for years begins to speak in unfamiliar ways, not with rage, but with clarity. At first, it feels wrong. It feels like betrayal to say no, to not offer yourself up for emotional labor, to stop smoothing every edge for someone else's comfort. But that feeling of guilt isn't the truth. It's the echo of the persona crumbling. Carl Jung warned that when we confuse our persona with our true identity, we sever the connection to our soul. The persona helps us survive, yes, but if we live inside it for too long, we forget who built it in the first place. And you did build it, piece by piece, out of the looks that made you feel ashamed, the silences that taught you not to speak, the praise that came when you performed. Eventually, the mask became more familiar than your own face. You began editing your every sentence to sound agreeable, measuring your value by how easy you were to love. You may remember a moment, one so small it almost disappeared, when you laughed at a joke that hurt you and no one noticed. Not even you, at first, but later you felt it. A subtle burn in your chest, like something sacred had been abandoned. That is how self-betrayal often begins. Quietly. In a room full of people, you shrink, smile, and stay silent while your soul twists in discomfort. It's not dramatic, it's practiced. And that's the tragedy. You became so fluent in their language that you forgot your own. You became a caretaker of everyone's comfort but your own. And you thought this was kindness. You thought this was love. But real love doesn't require your disappearance. What Jung understood, what you are beginning to feel, is that repression is not neutrality. It is a slow decay. Every swallowed truth, every abandoned instinct, every time you said yes when your body whispered no, those choices accumulate, not just in your mind, but in your nervous system, in your breath, and in the way you flinch before asking for what you need. You start losing sleep, not because you're overwhelmed, but because a part of you is grieving the self that was silenced to keep the peace. And eventually, something breaks. Not in a destructive way, but in a necessary way. A soft rupture that says, I can't live like this anymore. Not because you want to hurt anyone, but because you finally realize how much it's been hurting you. And so you begin to turn inward, not as a retreat, but as a reclamation. You stop asking who they want you to be. You begin asking who you are when no one else is watching. At first, this shift feels like a loss. You might lose relationships built on your compliance. You might lose roles that required your self-erasure. But what you gain is far more honest. You gain yourself. The real you, the one who has been waiting behind every polite nod and every forced smile, starts to return. And they don't speak with apology. They speak with groundedness, with quiet power, with truth that no longer asks for permission. This is the beginning of individuation, the slow, sacred process of peeling back the layers of performance to find the soul beneath, the process of becoming someone you recognize again, not perfect, but real, not agreeable, but whole. You're not betraying anyone by becoming yourself. You are simply ending the betrayal of your own essence. And as terrifying as it may feel, it is the beginning of freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't need applause. The kind that allows you to sit in a room, say nothing, and still feel full. Because now, you are no longer performing. You are present. And presence is what heals, what performance cannot. The most painful realization in this journey is not that others misunderstood you. It's that you misunderstood yourself. That for years, the version of you you've been defending wasn't even real. It was stitched together from expectations, shaped by silence, sustained by approval. You thought you were being loyal to family, to friends, to harmony. But what you were really doing was abandoning the small, sacred voice within that asked again and again, but what about me? Carl Jung called this betrayal, the splitting of the psyche. The moment when the authentic self is forced underground so that the socially acceptable self can survive. It doesn't happen in one moment. It's gradual, 1,000 small self-abandonments that, over time, become your personality. You learn to smile when you're exhausted. You learn to tolerate what breaks your spirit. You learn to call it strength. But somewhere deep inside, a part of you remembers who you were before you became agreeable. Think back to the child you once were, the one who asked questions that made adults uncomfortable, the one who cried too loudly or laughed at the wrong time, the one who wanted things without shame. That child wasn't broken. That child was alive. But over time, you were taught to edit yourself, not through cruelty, but through 1,000 subtle cues. The disapproving glance, the withheld affection, the praise only given when you performed. And so you began to comply. You became easy. You became good. But goodness in this context meant suppression. It meant silencing your instincts to make others feel safe. It meant dimming your light so you wouldn't outshine their comfort. And that's where the pattern began, not in adulthood, but in the earliest moments where love was confused with approval, where safety was earned through compliance. Now, as an adult, you feel it. The weight of all those unsaid words, the ache of all those buried no's, the quiet grief of a life lived at half volume. You sit at dinner tables and nod along while your insides twist. You say yes to favors that drain you. You apologize for being unavailable, for being tired, for being human. And when you try to speak your truth, you're from disuse. This isn't a communication issue. This is a soul wound, one that formed when you decided long ago that your truth was too dangerous to share, that your needs were negotiable, that love had to be earned by becoming small. But here's the turning point. What was once survival is now sabotage. What once protected you is now preventing you from becoming whole. You're not a child anymore. You don't need to beg for belonging. You don't need to shrink to stay safe. You don't need to keep proving that you're good enough, because you are. Beneath the layers of people-pleasing, Beneath the mask of agreeableness, there is a self that is not only real, but radiant. A self that is not afraid to be disliked, because being disliked for your truth is less painful than being loved for your mask. A self that knows peace does not come from avoiding conflict. It comes from not abandoning your soul just to be liked. This is the beginning of your return, not to who the world wanted you to be, but to who you were before the world told you to hide. And yes, it will be uncomfortable. People may push back. They may call you distant, difficult, or different. But that is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're finally being honest. And honesty, as Jung knew, is not the opposite of kindness. It is the foundation of true connection. Because no one can truly love you if they've never really met you. And now, finally, you are ready to be met. Not in pieces, not in person, but in full, in truth, in wholeness. But here is where the deeper unraveling begins. Not in the moment you speak your first no, but in the silence that follows. Because the world you built around your mask doesn't collapse gently. It resists. It pushes back. And sometimes so do you. You find yourself caught between the clarity of your truth and the comfort of your old role. You say what you feel and someone pulls away. You draw a boundary and someone calls you difficult. And suddenly, you're not just mourning lost relationships. You're grieving the part of you that needed them to stay. This is the emotional crucible Jung warned of, the psychic death of who you thought you were. Not because you were inauthentic, but because your identity was built on survival, not wholeness. And now that you're choosing truth over tolerance, your nervous system panics. You feel guilty not because you did something wrong, but because you're doing something unfamiliar. And unfamiliar, to the traumatized psyche, often feels unsafe. Imagine a woman who has always been the emotional anchor for everyone else. She's the one who listens, who smooths conflict, who shows up even when she's exhausted. People love her for it. They rely on her calm, her steadiness, her endless availability, but they don't see the price she pays in silence. They don't notice the way her hands shake when she finally puts the phone down, the way her body aches from holding back tears no one ever asks about. And one day, she says no, just once. She cancels dinner because she needs rest. She doesn't explain, doesn't over-apologize. And the response? Subtle withdrawal, a coldness in the voice, a look of confusion, even disappointment. Not loud, but enough to remind her, your worth was in your compliance. And in that moment, something inside her breaks. But it's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. Because she realizes, if love requires my exhaustion, it's not love. If acceptance demands my disappearance, it's not acceptance. And if I have to betray myself to belong, I'm not really belonging, I'm bargaining. This is the moment Jung described as the turning of the soul, the sacred rebellion, not against others, but against the internalized voices that told you to stay small. Because people-pleasing isn't just about others. It's about the internal contract you made long ago. If I am good, I will be loved. If I am easy, I will be safe. If I disappear, I will be accepted. But now, with every no that honors your energy, every truth that shakes the room, every boundary that reclaims your space, you begin to rewrite that contract. Slowly, the guilt starts to shift. It softens. It no longer screams betrayal. It whispers freedom. You start to see that your truth is not a threat. It is a filter. It does not push people away. It reveals who is capable of staying. And yes, some people will leave, but the ones who remain will be different. They will not be drawn to your silence, but to your sincerity. They will not need your mask to love you. They will not praise your selflessness while feeding off your depletion. They will sit beside your honesty, even when it's messy. They will not flinch when your truth breaks the pattern, because they too are learning how to come home to themselves. And in that shared courage, a new kind of connection is born, not based on performance, but on presence. Not on pleasing, but on mutual respect. Not on keeping the peace, but on growing through the discomfort of realness. Jung called this the return of the self, the re-emergence of the soul after years of exile. It is not a perfect process. It is not neat or tidy. It is raw. It is confusing. It is often lonely before it becomes liberating. But in this space, you begin to understand something sacred. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of truth. And when your truth is finally allowed to speak, you no longer settle for relationships that depend on your silence. You begin to live not as someone trying to be enough, but as someone who already is. But let's tell the truth. Most people never say aloud, transformation rarely feels empowering in the beginning. It feels like grief. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're saying goodbye to who you had to be to survive. And that version of you, pleasing, polished, predictable, was never fake. It was brilliant. It was the child who learned how to sense the room before speaking, the teenager who knew how to shrink in the presence of conflict, the adult who found their worth in being wanted, useful, and irreplaceable. But now you see it. You feel it. That life came at a cost. You spent years being everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. You thought this made you generous, but Jung would say this made you fragmented, because when you trade your truth for attachment, your soul starts to split. And you don't feel whole. You feel haunted by exhaustion. You can't explain. Guilt you can't shake, and relationships that feel more like roles than real connection. There's a woman who once believed being needed was the same as being loved. She never said no to her mother's demands, never disappointed her partner's expectations, never let a friend feel neglected. She was admired for her kindness and praised for her availability, but inside she was fading. She hadn't laughed without overthinking in years. Her dreams sat quietly in journals. Her anger, when it surfaced, came out sideways, sharp with resentment. Then came the moment. Not dramatic, just real. She said no, a small no, to a favor she didn't have the energy for. And what followed wasn't violence or rejection, but silence, a long, uncomfortable pause. The kind that makes you question everything, and in that pause she felt it. The old panic, the ancient fear that she had broken something sacred by protecting herself. But she didn't apologize. She didn't backtrack. She let the silence stand, and for the first time in her life, she chose truth over approval. It didn't feel like power. It felt like a loss. But it was the kind of loss that breeds freedom. This is the subtle, soul-deep work of individuation. Jung never promised it would be easy. He said it would make fixing yourself. It's about meeting the parts of you that were never allowed to exist. The anger you buried to stay soft, the ambition you suppressed to be likable, the fear you disguised as selflessness. All of it comes to the surface when you stop pleasing, and it's terrifying, because the first lie your guilt will tell you is that you're becoming selfish. But you're not. You're becoming sovereign. The difference? Selfishness is extraction. Sovereignty is self-respect. And when you begin to live from self-respect, your energy changes. You no longer over-explain your boundaries. You no longer feel compelled to be palatable. You begin to value how peace feels in your body more than how praise sounds in your ears. And slowly, the people around you start to notice. Some will distance themselves, not out of cruelty, but because your new vibration no longer mirrors their expectations. Let them. Their leaving is not rejection, it's a clearing, a spiritual reorganization. And in that space, something miraculous begins. New people arrive. People who don't need you to shrink so they can shine. People who don't confuse your silence with agreement. People who feel like truth, not transaction. But this new reality won't come from force. It comes from frequency, from the way you start carrying yourself when your worth is no longer tied to your usefulness. You walk differently when you're not performing. You speak differently when you're not afraid of being misunderstood. You breathe differently when your nervous system no longer flinches at the thought of someone else's disappointment. And that difference, that quiet, rooted, luminous selfhood, is what Jung meant by integration. You are no longer many fragmented selves dancing to the rhythm of external need. You are one undivided presence, and that presence changes everything. It does not mean you stop loving people. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. It does not mean you become hard. It means your softness is no longer a strategy, it's a gift, given by choice, not compulsion. It means you no longer walk into rooms scanning for safety. You carry it with you. And this inner steadiness, this refusal to betray yourself for connection, is not rebellion. It is a rebirth. And it cannot be taught through surface-level affirmations or performative boundaries. It must be lived. Day by day, choice by choice, breath by breath, until one day you wake up and realize something has changed. You're not pretending anymore. You're not pleasing anymore. You're not anxiously checking for signs that you're enough. You simply are. Not perfect, but present. Not always understood, but always true. And in that moment, you understand what Jung tried to tell us all along. The person you were before the world told you who to be. That was never the illusion. That was your soul. And now, finally, it's home. Final words. You'll stop pleasing people after this. Not because you've hardened, but because you've returned to yourself. Not because you've lost your kindness, but because you've remembered your worth. Carl Jung never asked you to reject others. He asked you to reclaim the parts of you that were exiled in order to be accepted. He wanted you to stop confusing sacrifice with strength, silence with maturity, and exhaustion with love. He knew the pain of transformation, the kind that doesn't scream, but aches quietly beneath a practiced smile. And yet, he knew it was sacred. Because when you begin to choose authenticity over approval, something ancient begins to stir in you. The original self, untouched by praise or punishment, begins to breathe again. This is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before you were told who to be. Remembering is not a single moment. It is a slow unfurling, like light returning to a room that had forgotten it had windows. It is the courage to sit in your discomfort without abandoning yourself, to stand in your truth without dressing it up to make it easier for others to accept. It is the quiet revolution of no longer needing to be agreeable to be loved, no longer needing to be useful to be valued, no longer needing to be perfect to be whole. The journey you've walked through, this awakening, this unraveling, this rising, is not the end. It is the beginning of a new way of being, one that doesn't seek validation through performance, but finds peace in presence. One that doesn't mistake guilt for guidance or rejection for failure, but sees them as signs that you are finally living by the compass of your soul. You may not be celebrated for this path. You may lose people along the way. But what you gain is irreplaceable. The ability to look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. Not as a role, not as a mask, but as someone real, someone free. Let this be your knowing. You are not here to earn your place. You are here to embody it. You are not here to be everything to everyone. You are here to be fully yourself, even if it makes others uneasy. True healing is not found in being liked. It is found in being liberated. And the ones who are truly liberated are not those who are never misunderstood. They are those who are no longer afraid to be. So walk forward, not with armor, but with awareness. Speak with the voice that trembled for years behind politeness. Sit with the feelings that once made you contort yourself into shapes that were never yours. Let the people who cannot meet the real you fall away like autumn leaves, gently, without blame. And let what remains be true. What remains will be yours, because what is meant for your soul will never require you to betray it. This is the quiet power of someone who is no longer pleasing to survive. This is the quiet peace of someone who has chosen to live. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, Or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.